In the war on drugs,
they are a necessary evil.
Confidential informants are vital. Police claim these cooperating criminals give them the edge.
Informants are oftentimes able to get into places that we cannot.
But others say sometimes
a lot of this happens in the shadows.
Using one comes at a high price.
It results in the wrong people being charged and convicted or punished for the wrong things. It results in wrongful convictions,
which the public pays for.
How does this happen with an informant being able to plant evidence in cases and basically lead to innocent people going to jail?
Well, the reality is these kinds of events can happen,
resulting in ruined lives.
I have no words for it. It's not right. It's not right.
And sometimes leading to police corruption.
The Wild West was not this crazy. The Wild West, it wasn't this stupid.
It's a KSAT 12 investigative special, A Necessary Evil, the cost of confidential informants. Thanks for joining us. I'm investigative reporter Tim Gerber. Police and prosecutors agree. The use of secret informants has been a boon to fighting crime, especially drug trafficking. That's because informants are often criminals themselves who got caught in the act and were offered a deal. Help law enforcement make cases against others, and you can stay out of jail. But a growing group of experts, attorneys, and ordinary citizens say there's a problem with this practice, that the secrecy needed to protect the informant's identity can hide questionable police work, often resulting in innocent people going to prison. And it's happened right here in San Antonio. So where did they come in when they raided the house?
That's the bedroom window of my bedroom. So I'm walking towards the front door from my bedroom inside the house, and I just opened the front door, and they were running. They were at the very same time.
October 2nd, 2017 is the day Ruby Sandoval's world turned upside down. The day deputies with the Bexar County Sheriff's Office Narcotics Unit raided her home.
I just seen them running up on the rest of them running behind them, and I'm looking, and they're just going straight to the back room. And they go, okay, it's right here, it's right here. And they pick me up, put cuffs on me, and sit me on the couch, which was right in front of that window.
But she says what came next simply left her stunned.
Then they come out, and they're just, like I said, they're just holding up that big bag, and yeah, I had to take a big breath. Yeah, kind of.
Ruby was in big trouble because that bag contained more than 2 pounds of methamphetamine, over 1,000 grams, making her look like a drug trafficker. But the irony?
When they raided me, I had a $2 bill. That's all I had to my name.
So they didn't find like a stack of cash in there?
Except my penny collection.
It wasn't the first time Ruby had been busted for drugs, but her previous arrests were just for possessing small amounts for her own personal use. But those were minor crimes compared to what she was now facing.
I'd be with other people that were getting in trouble, and I'd be swept in it too. I wasn't seeking out trouble or doing anything. I just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. Nothing like, I wasn't selling any drugs.
You were a user?
Yeah, I was a user. It's me, my mom and dad, when our daughter was born.
So how old are you here?
I'm 23.
Ruby wasn't always in trouble. In fact, she grew up in San Antonio with a family life many would envy. She had a loving mother, a politically connected father who was the president of LULAC, and she was even a Fiesta princess one year. What do you think of when you look back at photos like this?
How blessed I was.
But she says as she grew older, things changed.
And at what point in your life did something happen that you went from this all-American looking girl with a young daughter, that something happened in your life where drugs became a factor?
It was like, I don't know. I don't know if it was just a lifestyle or it was just, there was a coping mechanism there for a while when I was going through a bout of depression.
So she started self-medicating with meth.
It gave me a reason to get out of bed, go to work, and it wasn't like it was drinking and partying and stay down. That wasn't the purpose for it. It was to function, you know.
Right. Despite her past run-ins with police, Ruby insists she was never a drug dealer, just a user. So imagine her shock when deputies pulled out a huge bag of drugs.
We held it up just like that, and it was a big bag like that, and
Like a freezer type bag?
Like, yeah, like a storage, almost like, you'd put a sweater in or something. I don't know, it's just really big.
She told the deputies it wasn't hers, and then...
I get a sick feeling in my stomach.
Why? Because less than 24 hours earlier, she'd gotten a phone call. It was a man who she says she had previously bought drugs from for her own personal use.
My girlfriend and I are fighting. She's destroying my furniture, personal items.
And he wanted to know if he could temporarily store some things at her place. It's something she had done once before for a friend of his.
When he first came to the door, he had that big box, and I went to grab it, and he pulled back. He goes, "Oh, no, I got it." And I thought he was just being a gentleman. I said, "Yeah, but do you need help getting the rest of your, I thought he had more stuff." He goes, "Oh, no, I got my little girl with me, and I couldn't bring everything."
And before he left, Ruby says he gave her a small amount of meth as a thank you.
He goes, "Man, I really appreciate what you're doing." He goes, "Man, I don't know what I would do." He says, "I don't have nothing to sell you." I go, "Well, I didn't have no money to buy anything." He goes, "But here," and he pulled a bag out, and he just handed me some stuff in my hand, and I put it was just loose, it was no baggie or nothing, and I put it on my nightstand.
Suddenly, she knew. She'd been set up, and the deputies who were in her home seemed to know exactly what they were looking for and where to find it.
Because I'm realizing something's going down, Yeah, I mean, I knew from the moment, like I said, when they were putting me in cuffs, and I could see them walking down to the bathroom, and they're going to that room, and they were looking around, and they just went straight to that box. Okay, so I get home, and it's the aftermath. I came right back here, and the box that's the box.
Ruby started documenting everything.
But yeah, that was the box, and I don't want to touch it.
So began Ruby's long journey trying to prove the drugs deputies pulled from that box were planted in her home, brought there by a man who had to be working as a confidential informant. But she says no one was listening.
Every attorney I had tried to throw me under the bus.
What was your attorney telling you were facing as far as like jail time?
15 years, and that they'd offer me an 8-year deferred.
The prosecutor was offering to drop the more serious charges Ruby was facing for the 2 pounds of meth. In exchange, she would agree to plead guilty to possessing the small amount of meth that was found on her nightstand during the raid. She would avoid jail if she just took the state's offer. Her own lawyer wanted her to take the deal.
He says, "Look, this is a good deal, Ruby. If you're not taking it," he's like, even if I knew she was 100% innocent, because I tell her take the deal because, it's not worth going to trial and you getting 15 years. I tell her take the deal.
Ruby Sandoval refused that deal and fired her attorney. She couldn't admit to something she knew she didn't do. Desperate, Ruby decided to take a chance and track down the sheriff himself in person. Ruby thought the sheriff could help.
And she found him just outside his office.
He just so happened to be coming up the steps. This was the box that was storing stuff. I said, "Yeah, they're planting drugs in people's homes, and I think you need to be aware of this so you could take care of this problem because this isn't good."
Ruby says Sheriff Salazar said he'd contact her soon, but instead, the months passed.
He didn't call her, nothing. I thought, man, I'm getting deserted again.
So she phoned the sheriff again, and finally, she got to speak with a BCSO investigator.
He says, "Do you have proof of this?" I said, "Well, I'm telling you right now." He says, "Well, unless you got some hard evidence, there's nothing we could do."
But it turns out Ruby Sandoval wasn't alone because just across town, not one, but 3 other people were also facing similar drug charges. And they also claimed that an informant had set them up. In fact, it was the same man. Their story when we return.
Welcome back to A Necessary Evil, the cost of confidential informants.
In our first segment, you met Ruby Sandoval and learned how narcotics deputies for the Bexar County Sheriff's Office raided her home, finding nearly 2 pounds of methamphetamine inside. Drugs she insisted were not hers and that she'd never seen before. But what she didn't know was just a few weeks before that, something very similar happened to the people living here at this West Hermosa home. Bexar County deputies raided the property and made a big find inside, leaving the people who were here that day confused and in an awful lot of trouble. And just like Ruby, they would claim they were set up.
So it's like I just happened to be at the wrong place. Being that I was working this job, I was doing a side job and basically doing it for free, building a handicap ramp for this lady. I wasn't making any money, and look how much it ended up costing me.
Luis Garcia gave up a lot, including his freedom, when he agreed to help make improvements to the wheelchair ramp on the home of his friend Rexina Linan Juarez. Just the day before, he had witnessed the double amputee fall off of it.
I went out there and I helped her up, this and that. I looked at the ramp and I told her I have extra material at my house. I'll be glad to come over here and rebuild her ramp for her. And so, you know, she goes, I can't really pay you. And I was like, I'm not asking to, you know, I got extra material.
Rexina lived at the home with her boyfriend, John Cape. So the next day, John and Louie were outside working on the ramp when suddenly their day took a turn.
When I saw the van pull up, I told John, hey man, it's a paddy wagon, you know. All the officers came jumping out, and that's when I got arrested.
Yeah, they come right in, get on the ground, but we were already on the ground. And they picked me up and took me inside and told us what they were there for.
The answer? Drugs.
So they went in there and they went straight to the bathroom, and within 5 minutes they ready to come out.
And they pull out this big bag, and they're like, well, whose is this? And we're like, nobody, you know, it's not mine, it's not, you know, it wasn't John's. And then they just kind of said, well, it doesn't matter. Y'all are going down anyway.
And I said, no, that ain't mine. So y'all planted that. And they said, and one cop gets in my face, well, you've gone as crooked cops. And I said, nah, man, but that's the way it looks, you know.
Cape and Garcia had reason to be suspicious. Just before the raid, a friend of Rexina's and his little girl stopped by the house and asked if she could use the bathroom. Cape gave them the go-ahead. But Louis remembers.
This individual comes in, and he has a little girl with him. And I didn't know who he was, and she had a pink backpack.
But afterwards?
And then when they leave, she didn't have a backpack anymore. So as soon as they leave, they turn the corner, and here comes the sheriff's department.
Meanwhile, the lady of the house returned to a nightmare.
She had went to HEB, and when she came back, they were raiding, but they were in plain clothes. They had already dressed back out. So she didn't know who they were, you know. She walks in the house saying, who the are you? And they said, we're the Bexar County Sheriff Department, man, who are you? And she says, well, this is my house, and I'm Rexina. And they said, oh, so then this must belong to you, they told her. And she looks at me like, where did that come from, you know? And I said, your friend just borrowed the restroom.
John also remembers one deputy who seemed unusually proud of his arrest.
And he comes out of the restroom saying, we finally got you, Cape. We finally got you. You've been at this a long time. Because I told you I was going to get you.
John says he was mystified.
I looked at him and I said, who are you, man? How do you know me?
The bust was touted to local news media with a press release featuring John and Rexina's mugshots and photos of the drugs. Nearly 2.5 pounds of meth and smaller personal use amounts of heroin and pot. BCSO valued the confiscated contraband at $140,000. Louis Garcia wasn't included in the press release, but he was also facing some serious time. Even though he didn't live at the house, deputies claim they found a bank bag containing drugs that were found on the front porch next to Louis' tools.
That wasn't yours?
No.
Okay. Was that there before, or do you think that was also something that the informant might have left?
I have no idea.
Still, he says he and his attorney thought things might be okay.
You know, we were real confident. You know, this should be a dismissal. Right off the bat, this should be a dismissal. And then when we got into the courtroom, it was like a whole different story. They were like, I don't care about your affidavit. I don't care if you didn't live there. I didn't care about, you're gonna sign for 10 years, today. Or tomorrow, we're gonna have a jury trial, and you're looking at 25 to life.
25 to life?
Yes.
When you found out that's how much time you were facing, what did you think?
It was like somebody knocked the wind out of me. You can't think, you can't function. The first thing I started thinking is that my parents are old. I'm gonna lose them. I'm the only son. I'm supposed to be taking care of my parents.
The only hole I see is, yes, can you see me?
Delma Sanchez is the sister of Rexina Linan Juarez. Their mother owns the home where the bust happened. Deputies say they found most of the drugs in a hole in this bathroom wall, now repaired.
Go back.
Like right here? Right in here? Okay, so it's all been patched.
Right here. Yeah.
Did she say There's no way this was ours. Somebody had to have brought it.
Absolutely.
Like from the beginning.
Yes, she did tell me that. She said, Delma, someone had to have put it here. It's not mine. She said the name of the person, and I didn't remember it at that time, and I don't even know the person. But she kept saying that same story. It wasn't mine, Delma. I didn't do it.
Rexina didn't have a lengthy criminal history. She had been busted once for possession of marijuana, but her sister knew she was using illegal drugs to mask the pain caused by all of her health problems. She had been diagnosed with childhood diabetes when she was 14, and it eventually led to her having both legs amputated.
Was always in pain, crying, yelling off the top of her lungs, and we're there listening, and it broke our hearts every day. Every day it broke our hearts hearing that. Her yelling, her screaming, her body hurt.
Her health continued to spiral as she sat in jail. She wasn't getting regular dialysis treatments and suffered a miscarriage. Prosecutors would use her worsening health to convince John Cape to take a plea deal, something that, despite his previous run-ins with the law, he refused to do. So did Rexina and Louie, all of them insisting they were innocent.
I said, I ain't taking nothing. I told you I want to go to jury trial. What's part of that don't you understand? I want to go to jury trial. He says, man, ain't nobody going to believe you. And he said, well, you can't go on the stand because you're a convict, or nobody's going to believe you, or whatever. I said, well, I don't care. I still want to go to jury trial. I'm no plea bargain. I'm going to tell him everything. I'm going to put that little girl on the stand, tell him what she went and did in the restroom. Because, the little kid ain't going to lie. So she didn't tell the truth.
But as the saying goes, eventually things change.
And we're in court, and Rexina's crying over there, and she's going to sign. She'll tell me in the letters, she'll write to me that she just wanted to get out because she was sick and they wouldn't take her to the hospital.
So John told his lawyer he would accept a plea deal that day if the prosecutor agreed to keep Rexina out of jail. The result? Rexina got 10 years probation. John Cape got 10 years in prison.
So I thank him so much all the time that thank you for doing that for her, because he didn't have to. He didn't have to do that for her.
He admitted something he knew was not true.
Yeah, he said,
To save her,
yes,
get her out of jail.
yes. And she did. She came home and we took care of her for the next 2.5 years. But I feel in my heart of hearts that she wouldn't have made it maybe 6 months in there if she would have done the time. If John didn't say, hey, give him to me.
And as for Louie?
Your back's against the wall. You have no choice. Nobody's going to believe you.
With his two co-defendants making deals, Louie Garcia said he was left with very few choices.
And until your back is against the wall and you're looking at all these years that, yes, you're going to lose your family, you're going to lose this, you're going to lose everything if you lose in trial. But if you sign this plea deal, you're eligible for parole within so many years. And you're thinking, I could be home, good behavior, I take plenty of classes, I stay out of the way and I don't cause no problems, I will be home. And so it's like, do I roll the dice and take this kind of a chance and basically lose everything? And if you have a history, there's nothing you can do.
He agreed to take a plea deal that would send him to prison for 8 years.
You went in there that day and pled guilty to a crime you know you didn't do.
I didn't do.
It was now late 2018 as John Cape and Louie Garcia were beginning their prison sentences and Rexina Lenan Juarez's health was continuing to decline at home. Ruby Sandoval was still fighting her charges. That fight would ultimately lead to the discovery of a crooked informant planning drugs and the overturning of some wrongful convictions led by the Bexar County District Attorney's Office.
We'll be right back. This is a KSAT special, A Necessary Evil, the Cost of Confidential Informants.
It was now 2019, more than a year after the raid on her home, and Ruby Sandoval was still trying to find a way out of her nightmare. She had tried over and over to convince the Bexar County District Attorney's Office that she'd been framed, but she says the prosecutor did not seem to be listening. But little did she know that at a meeting with the prosecutor and her lawyer, something happened that finally caused everything to unravel.
Well, in the very beginning, I told them I had text messages, gave them to my attorney when I first got out of jail.
Ruby had a powerful piece of evidence that she had been set up by the county's informant. These 2017 texts between her and the man who had left the box at her home in which deputies found 2 pounds of methamphetamine, especially one he sent after her arrest.
He had texted me the following day since I didn't come home that night. And that's when he says, hey, are you home? You still got the box? Can I come pick up my box?
In those text messages, he claims ownership of the box. And that was definitive.
No, yeah.
And now even the state's prosecutor had doubts about the informant.
She realized something was a little bit off about it.
Matt Howard is the director of the DA's Conviction Integrity Unit that reviews questionable cases where someone has been convicted.
They basically were telling the defendant in that case, I'm bringing something to your house. Make sure it's at this location at this time. Make sure it's in this exact spot. It needs to be here. Don't open it under any circumstances. But I'm bringing this to your house. The package had contraband in it. So that was pretty clear evidence that that confidential informant had set that person up.
So their investigators went to work, starting with the informant.
Turns out in July of 2017, deputies caught him with a large amount of meth. He agreed to become an informant and produce 2 criminal cases each for 2 pounds of meth. If he fulfilled the contract, his charges would be dismissed. And guess what?
We discovered that there were 3 other cases that relied on this confidential informant.
Namely, Rexina Lenon Juarez, John Cape, and Louis Garcia.
What troubled you about this case when, the more that you started to investigate it and saw what happened?
The county appointed attorney Dana Jones to represent the 3 defendants.
A lot. The search warrant affidavit that the officer supplied in this case said that this was the first time that he was using this particular confidential informant. That was troublesome to me.
That's right. Deputies had never used that informant before. According to the warrant, the informant had only conducted what's called a controlled buy. A deputy met with him, gave him money, and watched the informant enter a location. When he returned, he turned over the drugs he just bought. For Jones, it's not enough.
Well, this confidential informant went and bought drugs for me, and so I know that they know what drugs are. That's all we had in this one. That's all the officers did.
Yet that's all it took for a judge to sign off on the search warrant for 1315 West Hermosa.
You know, it brought up a lot of anger and hatred.
For Louis Garcia, now on his 3rd year of prison, the confirmation of his innocence brought little peace in light of his so-called confession.
And the whole time I was in there, I was like, you sold yourself out. You sold yourself out, you know.
And as for John,
shouldn't have had it to begin with.
He had other problems on his mind because on the outside of the prison, as the gears of their exoneration process slowly turned, Rexina was now on her deathbed. Her sister remembers.
She would tell me, Dama, you'll see, Dama, whether I'm here or not, you'll see.
And so on August 21st, 2020,
I'm going to release you today.
A Bexar County judge found John, Louis, and Rexina were wrongfully convicted and eligible to have their cases dismissed.
I have already signed, agreed, proposed findings in each of your cases. Those will be forwarded to the Court of Criminal Appeals.
But sadly for Rexina, the ruling came too late. She died the day before she was declared innocent.
Yeah, she passed away the day before that the judge signed the form, and I mean, these were happy, sad tears at that time. I was like, oh my God, I wanted to yell off the top of my lungs and say, I knew you were right. I mean, I knew it. She knew she was right.
The ruling also came too late for John and Louis, who were still in prison.
I really wanted to be there with her, man. I really wanted to see her alive, really.
But 1 week later, after 25 months in prison, John and Louis were finally released, just in time to serve as pallbearers at Rexina's funeral.
He got out 3 days before her funeral services. I got all his stuff ready, a shirt, and he goes, I don't have anything, Delma. I said, I know. I said, I got it for you. I said, she wants you there. You deserve to be there for her. I mean, we had these 2 years because of you, you know. And I got him ready, and he carried her to her final resting place.
And what about Ruby Sandoval? Despite that it was her text that exposed the informant, her charges weren't dismissed until May of 2021, nearly 4 years after the BCSO narcotics unit raided her home.
I'm almost in disbelief that it's not like that anymore. I just can't believe that it's over.
Next, we sit down with the sheriff and Bexar County District Attorney to find out how this happened and how it can be prevented in the future. And you'll also hear from the man in the middle of this fiasco, the informant. And if you want more of our special, Unnecessary Evil, just scan this QR code with your phone to read more about our investigation.
Welcome back to a one-hour Defender's investigative special, A Necessary Evil, the Cost of Confidential Informants. So far, you've seen how 4 people were framed on felony drug charges by an informant working for the Bexar County Sheriff's Narcotics Unit. Then they were charged by the district attorney before finally being cleared. But we found there were still an awful lot of unanswered questions about the cases, so we sat down with the DA, the sheriff, and we even tracked down the informant.
First up, Bexar County Sheriff Javier Salazar.
Informants maybe are like a pencil, right? There's been so many other space-age technologies that make handwriting so much more advanced than just a stubby pencil, but we still use stubby pencils.
So what about the informant in the cases we showed you earlier?
You know, what I can tell you is we won't ever use this person again. But yeah, it'll be a cold day before we utilize this person again.
But he seemed to be of 2 minds of the district attorney's move to dismiss the drug dealing charges against Ruby Sandoval and the exonerations of Rexina Lenan Juarez, Louis Garcia, and John Cape. At one point, he told us,
I trust Mr. Gonzalez to make the right decision, and so when they informed us that they were going to be dismissing these cases, all we can do is agree with them and keep doing what we do.
But at another, he startled us with this claim.
You know, there were other indicators of narcotics activity going on, separate from what the CI had told us about, separate from what we believe the CI was doing in these cases. There were other indicators that there was drug dealing going on.
But a minute later, he seemed to contradict himself.
You know, I fully agree with the district attorney's assessment of this case, and I certainly support his decision to dismiss charges.
So just what has he done since then?
Was there any sort of internal review of what happened, kind of the missteps and how things happened the way they did?
Well, I think that's still occurring. And what we've been able to tell at this point is that I still don't believe that there was any malice on the part of the deputy involved. I think he was relying upon the best information that he had.
There was no disciplinary action?
I don't believe it was done as a result of these cases, no.
So nobody, because I understand that the lieutenant was transferred out of that unit after this, shortly thereafter.
Totally different reason.
Totally different reason.
Just one thing, it turns out that former narcotics supervisor is also on the county's Brady list. It's a list of law enforcement members who the district attorney has determined are too unreliable to testify in court.
That lieutenant, I also understand, is on the DA's Brady list. Do you have any idea why that is?
No, sir, I don't, but I have been made aware of that as well.
Would that be a concern to have a lieutenant who's overseeing an operation like that or a unit like that to be on the Brady list?
Absolutely, it would be. You know, but with that being said, I don't control who goes on that Brady list, and it's not like I can take any further action.
Has there been any sort of disciplinary action taken on anybody?
Not to my knowledge, no, sir. No.
But there was still one big question we had concerning the nearly 4 pounds of methamphetamine allegedly planted by the informant.
Do you have any idea where the drugs came from in these cases that were used? This guy gave up close to $200,000 twice worth of meth in these cases. There's questions about where those drugs would have come from. There's a large amount of drugs. Sure. It seems unbelievable that this guy would just be donating them knowing that they're going to be confiscated.
Well, to the layperson, it could be unbelievable, but to somebody that, and again, I'm not going to go into full detail on these cases, but what I can tell you is that perhaps keeping this person out of jail was very, very important to somebody that has ready access to those sorts of drugs, somebody higher up on the food chain than he. And to them, it's just an acceptable, it's the cost of doing business to keep this person out of prison.
We asked Bexar County District Attorney Joe Gonzalez the same question.
Do you have any idea where the drugs would have come from in those cases?
I have no idea. I mean, it would be pure speculation on my part to tell you.
So again, how does this happen with an informant being able to plant evidence in cases and basically lead to innocent people going to jail?
Well, the reality is these kinds of events can happen. What happened in these cases happened before the beginning of my administration.
Gonzalez also let us know that an investigation by his office has found another 5th case involving the same informant.
There is one situation where someone was on probation and this particular CI was used to support a motion to revoke that defendant's probation. We have since discovered that, and we have made efforts to resolve that favorably for this defendant. But so far, as I say, it has only uncovered one. That's not to say there aren't more out there.
We also had some questions for the informant, so we tracked him down.
My name's Tim. I'm a reporter with KSAT.
We're not showing him to protect his identity, but in a recorded conversation, he told us there may be 2 more cases he was involved in.
I'm working as an informant?
Yes.
Wow.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. There was a on the other side of the neighborhood. I forgot his name. I could find out his name. After that, it was a lady named, which they caught, like I said, in the vehicle coming towards where we were at, caught her down the street, made it seem like a traffic stop. Who else?
And what about the 4 original cases where he allegedly planted methamphetamine? We asked the DA.
Do you know if there's been any attempt to prosecute the informant that was used in these cases to, because he lied?
Well, that is still ongoing. We have encouraged the sheriff's office to bring us a case, and I'll tell you that when and if they do, we will look at it with a careful eye toward prosecution, because we do think that that is something that should be prosecuted.
There's not been any effort on your agency to press any charges against him for lying, right, and screwing up these cases, because the DA's office says the prosecutor on the case has basically said, hey, if you submit charges on this guy for lying, we'll take them, but there's not been any effort to do that.
Oh, I don't know if there's not been any effort. I'm certainly in support of it. If we're able to prove that up and present that case, absolutely, I'd be in support of it.
Oddly enough, court records show the informant has instead been recently charged for possession of methamphetamine. This time, he was picked up on a warrant issued by the DEA.
These are new charges, what I'm arrested for. I mean, they got a search warrant, came in. Supposedly they found something, but they never showed us. And it just says on the receipt, I got it there, it says 3 bags of methamphetamine, undetermined amount of weight.
Were these the same guys that you had worked with in the past?
No, they're different guys.
Do you think that what happened recently is kind of retaliation for that?
I think so.
When we come back, this isn't the first time that the Bexar County Narcotics Unit has come under fire. We'll tell you all about that, and also about how a deadly drug raid opened up a Pandora's box of corruption in another Texas city. Welcome to our nation's capital. So what are we doing here?
There's been a lot of major cases that have been cracked because of informants.
Talking with Jim Trainum, a retired D.C. Metro Police officer with 27 years experience.
They're useful, they're important.
Trainum's been everything from a homicide detective to a department chief. He's also an expert in how wrongful convictions can happen with a confidential informant.
Especially if they're facing a lot of jail time, they're under a huge amount of pressure to provide information, and if they can't, then oftentimes they will make it up. They'll create something that isn't there.
And if it involves narcotics, Trainum says,
a lot of drug detectives are real cowboys, and they're out there like on their own doing a lot of crazy stuff.
The result, he says, supervision is a must.
So you really need somebody, good oversight, good asking questions about the warrants and things like that.
We had Trainum look over the warrant and the justification used to get deputies into the home of Rexina Lenan Juarez and John Cape. And right away, he had concerns about the informant.
Well, that was part of the wording that I saw in the search warrant that kind of raised some red flags for me. Just how kind of ambivalent they were about this guy's track record. In reading it, you're really not sure if he bought drugs from that house. But it kind of leads you to believe, when you first skim it, that yeah, he did a control buy. But it's really not clear. And to me, I mean, as a supervisor, I would have wanted that to be clear. I bought drugs from this house, and who I bought drugs from that house. Somebody should have picked up on that.
But when we asked Sheriff Salazar,
it would seem at the very least that there was some sort of lack of supervision for this to happen in 2 cases.
Well, I beg to differ. While we do everything that we possibly can to supervise the goings-on and to scrutinize search warrants, I don't know that it was necessarily a shortcoming on the part of the supervisors.
But issues about supervision in the BCSO narcotics unit have come up before. 2010, 2 deputies were charged with pocketing county money meant to pay confidential informants for their work, with one of them also charged with aggravated perjury for claims he made in a drug search warrant. Court records included this internal affairs investigation in which a department supervisor admitted there were no set policies and procedures in place for the narcotics unit, that it also had chronic record-keeping problems involving payments to confidential informants, and that supervisors did not read and check search warrant applications before they were submitted to a judge for approval.
They painted a picture at that trial that this unit was a complete mess, it was disorganized, and I understand that they kind of cleaned house after that, but were you aware of what happened back then?
I was actually at City Narcotics, and yes, we heard about it. We heard about it from our own informants that had had run-ins with the county folks.
And in the end, the DA's office sent out 239 warnings to defense attorneys whose cases the 2 deputies had worked on. Eventually, 2 prisoners were determined to be wrongfully convicted and freed. And after a jury found one of the deputies innocent of 3 of the charges filed against him and were hung on the 4th, the then district attorney decided to drop all of the criminal claims against the 2 men in exchange for their law enforcement licenses.
I know that the vast majority of those people are gone from this agency, and some of them from the profession altogether. But with that being said, I just knew that I wanted to move this agency forward, and I think we've done a good job of doing that.
But then there's this. 2018, this 11-year narcotics unit deputy was fired for allegedly pressuring a confidential informant when he was on duty and off. Why? He wanted the woman to illegally buy him hydrocodone for his own use. Also fired, his supervisor, a lieutenant with over 20 years of service. He knew about the informant situation but delayed reporting it to command staff. That lieutenant was later rehired by the sheriff, but as a sergeant in court security.
It seems like the narcotics unit there has an issue and they're not learning their lessons.
That's the thing. You can take people out. There's a bad apple. Take out the bad apples and everything will be okay. Well, the bad apples got there because of the system. If you don't change the system, we're going to keep doing what we're doing.
But some Texas cities may have even bigger problems when it comes to their undercover narcotics units.
What we've seen in Texas over and over are, frankly, corrupt law enforcement.
Scott Henson is the policy director with Just Liberty, a nonprofit dedicated to criminal justice reform. Henson points to one drug unit in particular.
Clearly, the culture of the agency just allowed it, right? These were some of the most senior detectives in the Houston Narcotics Division.
That's right, the Houston Police Department Narcotics Unit.
11844, we're going to be at 7815 Harding, 7815 Harding.
January 28, 2019. 10 HPD narcotics officers using a no-knock search warrant raid a home. Gunfire is exchanged and the married couple inside, Dennis Tuttle, 59, and his wife, Rohina Nicholas, 58, are killed in a hail of bullets. So why the raid?
We have the house surrounded, we got units in the back, we still got officers inside.
Lead case agent Gerald Goins stated in his warrant application that an informant had bought black tar heroin from the house. But an internal investigation revealed that there was no informant and no drug buy had been made. In short, it was a lie. The only drugs discovered at the house, a small amount of marijuana and cocaine. But what Internal Affairs did find was that some officers in the unit, with the support of 3 supervisors, had been stealing money meant to pay their informants. Some officers were also determined to have lied in other unrelated search warrants, and others to have stolen overtime from the city. 6 officers now face criminal charges, along with Officer Gerald Goins, who was indicted for 2 counts of felony murder in connection with the death of the Tuttles. And according to Scott Henson, the police internal investigation also revealed something else. The cases using actual informants were not resulting in busting big-time suppliers. Instead,
big fish get off, little fish get eaten.
He explains.
In Houston PD, they did an audit of their narcotics division. Almost all the cases that they were getting with informants were less than 1 gram cases.
So why is that a problem? Henson says police often claim that using an informant lets them bring in the major drug traffickers and even cartels. In other words, the big fish. But in this case,
they weren't big fish. It's just not true. You can say it over and over, and they certainly have. That's how it's always justified.
One other finding from that audit, Henson says,
they found no controls at all to prevent the same types of misconduct that those officers were engaged in from happening with the other 200 officers in that division. Right. And so that's almost certainly the tip of the iceberg.
Up next, you'll hear more from the Bexar County Sheriff and the District Attorney. And we talk to local and national experts about what they think will improve what turns out to be a nationwide problem. And if you want more of our special and necessary evil, just scan this QR code with your phone to read more about this investigation. Welcome back to A Necessary Evil, the cost of confidential informants.
It results in wrongful convictions. It results in often police corruption.
Meet Alexandra Natapov, professor of law at Harvard University and former federal public defender.
It results in the wrong people being charged and convicted or punished for the wrong things.
She's also a well-known expert on the impact of confidential informants on our legal system and has even testified before Congress on the issue. And she says,
using a snitch is a cheap, unmonitored, easy way to generate arrests, even if those arrests are no good, even if they don't lead to a big fish or reducing crime and violence in a particular neighborhood.
But an even bigger problem, Natapov says,
it is predictable that when we give law enforcement carte blanche to operate in secret to cut deals, that we can expect rule bending and rule breaking on all fronts.
And that, Natapov says, has sometimes resulted in disastrous, even deadly incidents across the country. Atlanta, Georgia, 7 p.m., November 21st, 2006. Atlanta police narcotics officers shoot and kill 92-year-old grandmother Katherine Johnson after bursting into her home. Why?
They had stopped a suspect on the street who had given them a tip.
Problem?
They couldn't use that informant to get a warrant because he wasn't one of their registered informants.
So she says they invented one.
They said a reliable, confidential informant who has worked for us before told us that he bought drugs at this address.
But once inside, they found no drugs in the house. So what did they do? One officer planted marijuana at the scene, and
the police at that moment, in that moment of crisis, turned to yet a third informant, an informant they had used before, and offered him $130
to play the part of the made-up informant. But in the end, it all fell apart and all three officers were discovered, federally charged, and sent to prison. But what bothers Natapov is
each step along the way, the chances of the police getting caught were very, very low.
An expert and former police detective Jim Trainham points out that secrecy meant to protect the identity of the informant often makes it easy to get a judge to approve a warrant because
we use this boilerplate language in these search warrants, and they're almost rubber stamped. As long as certain language is in there, it's just, okay, you're good to go.
So what's the solution? Professor Natapov calls them reliability hearings, bringing the informant before a judge to check their credibility as an informant and also to corroborate any alleged tips before a search warrant is approved.
So we put it to Bexar County DA Joe Gonzalez.
Do you think that there should be those types of reliability hearings?
Sure, I'm in favor of that. It benefits everyone. It benefits the system when you can have those sorts of hearings and you can ferret out reliable versus unreliable witnesses, not only informants, but other sorts of witnesses. So sure, I think that's a good step.
Recently in Austin, a proposed law supporting court reliability hearings on informants gained ground, but ultimately died in the state legislature. And there's another issue.
The problem is that in this day and age, we almost never go to trial.
And that, Natapov says, may be leading to more innocent people going to prison when their case involves a CI. She explains that, ideally,
the American criminal system relies on the trial as the great moment of disclosure.
Because that's when witnesses and evidence can be rigorously tested and examined in a public setting. But today,
the vast majority of our criminal system runs on plea bargains. 95% of all the convictions in this country are the result of a deal, not of a trial.
And in those plea negotiations, it's the prosecutor who's in charge, and it's a whole different ballgame. Retired officer Jim Trainum has been there.
A plea negotiation is just like what happens in the interrogation room. We're just like master high-pressure salesmen. We give them these two options. It's one or the other, one or the other. That's it. And you only have right now to take it. Because if you walk out the room, everything's off the table, and this is what's going to happen to you.
But Trainum says in a plea bargain, the prosecutor can go even further.
The prosecutor can make threats, and he can follow through with those threats.
Sound familiar? Again, Louis Garcia.
It was no focus on anything except this is what you're going to take. This is all you get to take. I don't care if you didn't live there. I didn't care about. You're going to sign for 10 years today, or tomorrow. We're going to have a jury trial. And you're looking at 25 to life.
Even the DA admits.
I suspect there are many people that have accepted plea deals because they just want to get on with their life. Absolutely, I'm concerned about it. That's the kind of thing that keeps me up at night. Are people sitting in prison that don't belong in prison?
As a result, he says he's instituted some reforms.
We have a more detailed review process where we vet confidential informants that are used on some of our cases.
And he says they've also been reviewing past cases going back a decade. And as for the Bexar County Sheriff?
Well, with us, and I can tell you there's been a shift in how we conduct narcotics investigations. Not necessarily because of this case, but we just felt that it was a better way of doing things. It's more of an intelligence-led effort. With that being said, I don't think that informants are ever going to fully go away.
Finally, there's just one more issue.
That we have no idea whether it's making things worse or making things better.
Natapov says whether locally or nationally, there's a lot we don't know about the success and failures of using criminal informants.
There is no law enforcement entity or official in this country that knows how many informants there are, how many crimes they solve, and how many crimes are tolerated by law enforcement, by the informants that they run.
The result, says Natapov?
We don't actually know, on balance, whether using informants makes us safer or not. We have no idea how many crimes are solved by informants, and we have no idea how many crimes are committed by informants. In effect, we take it on faith that law enforcement tells us this is worth it.
As for locally,
well, there hasn't been any kind of tracking system historically. Before I came into office, there wasn't any kind of system or program where we could look and say, well, this particular CI has a bad record, so let's not use them in the past. So it's really a case-by-case situation.
But with or without a tracking system, Just Liberty's Scott Henson has this take.
So you're not at all surprised by the Bexar County cases here where they're using a first-time informant?
The only surprise is that you're covering it.
Really?
Yeah. This is happening everywhere, every day. It really is. The only surprise is that anyone's paying attention.
Which brings us back to the victim.
How has your life been impacted by all of this?
I have some issues. I go into isolation a lot. I don't have any problem staying in my room for days.
But being set up cost Louis more than his freedom.
I lost my relationship because of this. She really thought I was out there selling drugs, and I ended up losing the house. She ends up losing the house because I wasn't there to help with the bills.
And he says the stain on his record has made it hard to find work.
And I was a licensed electrician before, and I'm real good at my job. And it just seems like after I've gotten arrested, I can't do it anymore.
Is that one of the reasons you were a little bit hesitant wanting to talk to us?
As for John Cape?
Yeah, because I feel they're going to go harass me and maybe plant more drugs on me, and I'll be screwed again.
Besides losing the woman he loved, he says since the police raid, he's lost his sense of security, living in fear of another raid.
They ruining people's lives that have nothing to do with it. They just don't seem to care.
Is it hard to come back here?
Yeah, kind of.
That's because while fighting for her innocence, Ruby Sandoval lost the home she lived in for 18 years and nearly all of her personal belongings.
I still love that home. It was just my little house. I loved it.
There's just a lot of different pictures.
She's now living with her adult daughter as she tries to get back on her feet. And the one thing she says she didn't lose, her faith.
During this time, it felt like there was a hand on my shoulder all the whole time telling me, it's, I'm here, it's going to be okay.
She is the hero of this story. She was putting her entire future on the line.
Big Red was her favorite.
Just weeks after the one-year anniversary of Rexina Lenon Juarez's passing, her sisters and mother gathered at her grave, where we arranged their first meeting with Ruby.
Thank you so much for everything you've done.
Oh, honey.
I appreciate it. I know you've gone through the hell.
You're so welcome. She spoke a lot about how much her family meant and her children, and I'm just glad that this is coming to the way it did.
She's here and she loves that we have her story out, because I know she thinks that we forgot about it, and no, we're not.
Thank you for spending the past hour with us. I'm Tim Gerber for KSAT 12 and The Defenders. The Night Beat is next.